The bus hissed to a stop under a sky bruised purple with dusk, its doors folding open like reluctant wings. Emmanuel stepped down his sneakers, scraping the cracked sidewalk, body coiled tight as a tripwire from years of jungle patrols. The air hung heavy with the scent of impending rain, cool and foreign. Nothing like the thick, blood-tanged humidity of home. His eyes darted rooftops, parked cars, shadowed alleys, seeking snipers that weren't there, ghosts that never left. This place is too quiet, he thought, heart thudding a muffled drumbeat like the calm before an ambush. Brian stood by a faded blue sedan, hands shoved in pockets, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes, oblivious to the war raging in the boy's silence. A distant bark echoed from the house ahead, sharp as a rifle crack, making Emmanuel flinch, his fingers twitching toward a phantom weapon. Inside the lit window, shadows outlined, shifted, ears pricked, watching the newcomer with a gaze that pierced the twilight like an old wound reopening. The house loomed at the end of a manicured cul-de-sac, its vinyl siding gleaming under sodium streetlights, a facade of normalcy that felt to Emmanuel like a paper-thin barrier against the chaos inside him. Brian fumbled with keys, the door creaking open to reveal a living room bathed in the dim glow of a single lamp, shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. The air smelled of polished wood and faint dog musk, a sterile cleanliness that choked him, reminding him of the empty villages he'd raised, hollow shells where life had fled. Floors groaned under their steps, each one a potential minefield in Emmanuel's mind, his breath shallow as he scanned for exit traps. From the far corner, shadow emerged a scarred German shepherd with fur matted over jagged lines of old wounds, his low growl rumbling like distant artillery. The dog's eyes, amber and unblinking, locked on Emmanuel, hackles, subtly raised body stiff as if braced for impact. Outside, thunder grumbled, a storm brewing that mirrored the turmoil in Emmanuel's chest, flashes of lightning illuminating Shadow's face, highlighting the pale scars that snaked across his muzzle like maps of forgotten battles. He's like me, Emmanuel's thoughts whispered unbidden, watching for the next blow. The room felt smaller, charged, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for the fragile piece to shatter. Upstairs, in the room that smelled of fresh paint and emptiness, Emmanuel dropped his worn duffel bag with a thud that echoed too loudly in his skull. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the springs creaking like bones under strain, his hands clasping a crumpled photograph pulled from his pocket, his sister's face frozen in a smile from a world that no longer existed. Why here, why now? The thoughts swirled unbidden, a cyclone of memories, the jungle's green haze, the crack of rifles, his small hands gripping a gun, too heavy, blood staining the earth like spilled ink. He pressed palms to his temples, trying to crush the images, the screams of friends turned enemies, the commander's whip cracking like thunder, his own voice lost in the cacophony. Breath came in shallow gasps, chest tight as if bound by vines, numbness spreading like frost over his skin. Downstairs, Shadow's soft whine filtered through the floorboards, a sound that tugged at something deep, unrecognized, a mirror to his own silent howl. Emmanuel's eyes glazed, staring at the wall, where shadows danced like phantoms from the lamplight. His body still, but mind fracturing piece by piece into the void of what he'd become, a survivor, adrift, hollow as a spent shell. No tears fell. They dried up long ago in the heat of betrayal. Instead, a quiet paralysis settled his fingers, curling into fists, nails digging into palms until blood welled, a small pain to anchor the larger one, threatening to swallow him whole. Rain began to patter against the window pane, soft at first, then insistent, like fingers tapping a code only the lost could understand. Emmanuel rose, drawn to the glass, his reflection a ghost superimposed over the storm-smeared night. Out there, the world-blurred streetlights haloed in mist, trees swaying like sentinels in the wind. But inside, a prickle at the back of his neck made him turn. In the hallway's dim glow spilling under the door, a shadow shifted, not human, but deliberate, alive. Shadow the dog stood there unseen, but felt his breath a faint rhythm through the wood eyes, perhaps fixed on the barrier between them. A memory flickered in Emmanuel's mind, a stray dog in the jungle camp, loyal to the end, its gaze holding secrets of survival and sorrow. "What do you see in me?" he wondered, hand hovering near the knob, a hesitation born of fear and curiosity. The dog's presence lingered, a silent promise or warning, heavy as the air before a raid. Then a soft scratch, claws on floor, and the shadow receded, leaving Emmanuel with a chill that wasn't from the rain, a whisper of change coiling in his gut like smoke from a distant fire. The jungle had been Emmanuel's cradle, and his grave a labyrinth of emerald shadows where childhood dissolved into smoke and gunfire. At 9, he'd been ripped from his village, the acrid burn of burning huts searing his lungs as rebels dragged him away, his sister's cries echoing like a fading dream. Amina, he thought now, the name a thorn in his heart. Her face the last light before the darkness swallowed him. Forced into the ranks, his small hands learned the weight of an AK-47, the recoil bruising his shoulder as he fired into the void, each shot carving regret deeper into his soul. The commander, a man with eyes like polished stones, had branded him a soldier, but Emmanuel knew he was a puppet strings pulled by fear and betrayal. Losses piled like fallen leaves. Friends executed for weakness, villages razed on orders he couldn't refuse, his own innocence buried under layers of blood and mud. Regret gnawed at him in the quiet moments, whispers of what if I had run, blending with the ghosts of those he'd failed. Now, in this American suburb, isolation wrapped him like vines, a boy adrift in a sea of strangers, his past a locked chest he dared not open. Brian's kind words bounced off him like rain on leaves, unable to penetrate the fortress of grief. Emmanuel's vitality, once a spark in his sister's games, had dimmed to embers, leaving only emptiness, a hollow echo of the child who dreamed under starlit skies. Flashbacks struck like lightning. Amina's hand slipping from his in the chaos, her body crumpling under fire he couldn't stop. I should have died with her, the thought looped endless, binding him in chains of solitude. Days blurred into a mechanical haze in the house that felt like a cage draped in comfort. Emmanuel rose at dawn, not from habit, but from nightmares that chased sleep away, his body moving on autopilot through the sterile kitchen, where Brian left cereal bowls like offerings to a ghost. He ate in silence, spoon clinking against porcelain, the only sound his gaze fixed on the window where suburban lawns mocked his inner wilderness. School was a distant obligation. Brian drove him words of encouragement falling flat, but Emmanuel sat in classes like a statue, answers monosyllabic eyes scanning exits as if expecting an ambush. Afternoons dissolved in his room, door locked, sketching twisted trees and faceless figures in a notebook hidden under the mattress, each line a barrier against the flood of memories. Shadow's presence downstairs unnerved him. The dog's limping gait echoed his own fractured steps, but Emmanuel avoided the animal, flinching at barks that sounded like commands. Defense wrapped him tight, curt nods to Brian's questions, hands shoved in pockets to hide tremors, a wall of numbness that kept pain at bay. The house amplified his void, empty rooms, echoing with unspoken loss. The tick of a clock measuring time he wished would stop. Emotional frost settled deep each day, a repetition of survival disconnected from the world that had saved him, yet couldn't touch the war inside. Shadow's world had been forged in the crucible of distant battlefields, a German shepherd bred for duty. His coat, once sleek, now etched with the calligraphy of scars from shrapnel and whips. Deployed in overseas missions, he'd patrolled dusty outposts, nose to the ground, sniffing for explosives, his keen senses a lifeline for soldiers who called him brother. But betrayal came. Swift handlers pushed him beyond limits, chaining him during bombardments, his howls drowned in the roar of artillery. One night, under a moonless sky, a mortar shell exploded nearby, tearing his flank open, pain blooming like fire as he dragged himself to safety, loyalty unmet with mercy. Abandoned after his wounds deemed him unfit, Shadow was shipped back, a retired therapy dog now, but the abuse lingered, flinching at raised voices, growling at sudden shadows, his eyes holding the haunted depth of a veteran who'd seen too much. Survival instinct thrummed in his veins like a constant hum, making him hypervigilant, ears perking at the faintest creak, body tensing like a bowstring in the quiet suburban house. Physically, he limped on rainy days, the scar tissue pulling tight, a reminder of the handler's boot that had crushed his spirit one final time. Behaviorally, he avoided touch, curling in corners, with a low whine that echoed unspoken pleas, yet his training compelled him to linger near pain, sensing Emmanuel's turmoil like a scent on the wind. The dog's pain mirrored the boys, both betrayed by those meant to protect both survivors in a world that had moved on without them. Shadow's muzzle, graying prematurely, bore faint lines from muzzles too tight, his breath often shallow as if bracing for the next blow. In moments of stillness, he'd stare out windows, amber eyes distant, reliving patrols where loyalty was repaid with abandonment, his soul as fractured as the boys, waiting for a reason to trust again. In the quiet hours when Brian slept, Emmanuel and Shadow orbited each other like twin moons, their emptiness reflected in subtle, unspoken symmetries. Emmanuel's flinch at a slamming door echoed Shadow's shudder, both bodies wired for threats that lingered in memory's fog. The boy would sit cross-legged on the floor, sketching phantoms from his past, while the dog lay across the room, head on paws, eyes tracking each stroke of the pencil, as if recognizing the pain in the lines. When Emmanuel dropped a glass in the kitchen shards, scattering like spent casings, he froze, breath held, waiting for punishment. Shadow didn't bolt, but lifted his head ears flat, his own scars seeming to pulse in solidarity, a low whine escaping like a shared confession. Their mirrored voids deepened in silence, Emmanuel's isolation a fortress of unshed tears, Shadow's a cage of unhealed wounds. Yet in these moments a thread formed, invisible but taut. The dog's vigilant stare met the boy's averted gaze, both avoiding contact yet drawn by the echo of betrayal. Emmanuel's hands trembled when reaching for food, much like Shadow's hesitant approach to his bowl, each bite taken with a glance over the shoulder. The house became a canvas for their parallel arcs nights, where Emmanuel paced insomnia clawing at him, mirrored by Shadow's restless circling paws, padding softly as if patrolling invisible perimeters. Nonverbal cues wove their bond, a sigh from the boy, drawing the dog's ears forward, a subtle shift in posture signaling mutual recognition. As days blurred, the recovery hinted at symbiosis, Emmanuel's rare, fleeting smile when watching birds outside coaxing Shadow's tail to twitch the first crack in their armored emptiness. The suburban sanctuary, once sterile, now hummed with this quiet parallel, two souls adrift, finding in each other a mirror that promised perhaps a way back from the brink. Thunder cracked like a whip across the sky, jolting Emmanuel from a fitful sleep, his body slick with sweat from dreams of jungle storms laced with gunfire. The house groaned under the assault of wind and rain, windows rattling as if besieged by invisible foes. Downstairs, Shadow's barks erupted, frantic, primal, cutting through the downpour like distress signals. Emmanuel bolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs, instincts honed by years of raids pulling him to the window. Outside the yard was a maelstrom, sheets of rain silvered by lightning trees thrashing like wounded beasts. Shadow had burst through the dog door, a dark streak vanishing into the chaos, chasing a flickering shadow near the fence, a raccoon eyes glinting feral in the flashes. Emmanuel's breath fogged the glass. He shouldn't care, but the dog's silhouette now cornered against the shed. Hackles raised and body trembling sent a shockwave through him. Shadow growled, low teeth bared, but his scarred flank quivered, old wounds reopening in the wet blood, mixing with mud like forgotten battle paint. The sight hit Emmanuel like a grenade, the dog's fear raw and exposed, mirroring his own buried terror. Rain hammered the roof, urgency swelling with each thunderous boom, the storm's fury amplifying the scene into a vortex of danger. He's out there alone. Emmanuel's mind raced, the protective spark igniting despite himself, drawing him toward the door, boots slapping against the floor as he plunged into the night, soaked instantly, the cold rain a barrage against his skin. Emmanuel froze at the edge of the porch, rain cascading off the eaves like a curtain of knives, his hand gripping the railing until knuckles whitened. Shadow's growls mingled with the raccoon's hisses, the dog backed against the shed, eyes wide with a vulnerability that clawed at Emmanuel's chest. Turn back. His mind screamed logic. A cold blade carrying was a trap, a path to loss. His sister's hand slipping away in the smoke, friends crumpling under fire, each bond a wound that never healed. Why risk it for a dog, a scarred beast who mirrored his own brokenness too closely? The storm whipped around him, wind howling accusations of weakness, his shirt plastered to skin like a shroud. Yet Shadow's gaze pierced the darkness, amber orbs pleading in silence, stirring echoes of Amina's final whisper. "Help me, brother," a memory that twisted his gut. Empathy warred with fear. An internal storm fiercer than the one outside attachment meant pain, vulnerability, a death sentence in the jungle of his past. But the dog's trembling form, so like his own in the mirror of nightmares, chipped at the walls. Just this once he bargained with himself, feet inching forward, the scale tipping toward compassion, as thunder urged him on a reluctant hero emerging from the shadows of doubt. Emmanuel lunged into the storm mud, sucking at his feet like quicksand from forgotten swamps, his shouts raw and guttural, slicing through the rain to scatter the raccoon into the shadows. The creature hissed once more before vanishing over the fence, leaving Shadow trembling. Soaked fur plastered to his frame, scars gleaming slick under lightning's glare. Emmanuel slipped knees, slamming into the earth, pain shooting up his legs like old bullet wounds. But he pushed forward, hands outstretched toward the dog's collar. Shadow snapped instinctively, teeth flashing white in the dark confusion and fear making him recoil, but Emmanuel dodged murmuring words from his native tongue, soft pleas lost in the wind as he grabbed hold. The collar was slick, slipping through his fingers twice, before he gripped firm, yanking Shadow back with a force that sent them both tumbling into the muck. Rain pelted their faces, blinding the dog's weight heavy against him. As they scrambled upright, Emmanuel's arms wrapping awkwardly around the animal's neck in a half-hug, half-restraint. It was clumsy, imperfect, a tangle of limbs and growls mud-caking their skin and fur, but the act sealed itself irreversible as a fired shot. Shadow's resistance-ebbed body going slack against the boy's chest, their breaths sinking in ragged bursts amid the fading thunder. Emmanuel hauled them toward the house one step at a time, the door a beacon in the chaos, his mind blank, save for the pounding certainty I couldn't let him face it alone. Inside, the kitchen light cast a warm glow that felt mocking against their drenched forms, water pooling on the tile like blood from an unseen wound. Emmanuel released Shadow gently, the dog shaking himself with a spray that dotted the walls, his eyes wide and watchful, fixing on the boy with a new wariness, softened by something deeper. Hands still trembling from adrenaline and cold, Emmanuel grabbed a towel from the counter, kneeling slowly, offering it like a truce flag. Shadow tensed muscles rippling under scarred skin, but didn't flee. Instead, he allowed the cloth to brush his flank. Emmanuel's movements deliberate, wiping away mud and blood with care that echoed, tending his own hidden hurts. The silence stretched, broken only by their labored breaths and the storm's muffled roar outside a fragile space where trust began to root. He poured water into a bowl, sliding it forward, and Shadow approached, hesitantly, lapping with glances upward, as if testing the boy's intent. Emmanuel sat back against the cabinets, whispering, "You're safe now." The words foreign on his tongue meant as much for himself as the dog, a promise forged in the mess of the night. Shadow's gaze held his amber depths, reflecting a shared vulnerability, the first thread of a bond weaving between them, delicate as spider silk, but unbreakable in its quiet strength. As the dog settled nearby, not touching but close, Emmanuel felt the weight of his decisions settle too. A shift from solitary survival to something intertwined, healing flickering like a distant light. Inside, the kitchen light cast a warm glow that felt mocking against their drenched forms, water pooling on the tile like blood from an unseen wound. Emmanuel released Shadow gently, the dog shaking himself with a spray that dotted the walls, his eyes wide and watchful, fixing on the boy with a new wariness, softened by something deeper. Hands still trembling from adrenaline and cold, Emmanuel grabbed a towel from the counter, kneeling slowly, offering it like a truce flag. Shadow tensed muscles rippling under scarred skin, but didn't flee. Instead, he allowed the cloth to brush his flank. Emmanuel's movements deliberate, wiping away mud and blood, with care that echoed, tending his own hidden hurts. The silence stretched, broken only by their labored breaths, and the storm's muffled roar outside a fragile space where trust began to root. He poured water into a bowl, sliding it forward, and Shadow approached hesitantly, lapping with glances upward, as if testing the boy's intent. Emmanuel sat back against the cabinets, whispering, "You're safe now." The words foreign on his tongue meant as much for himself as the dog, a promise forged in the mess of the night. Shadow's gaze held his amber depths, reflecting a shared vulnerability, the first thread of a bond weaving between them, delicate as spider silk, but unbreakable in its quiet strength. As the dog settled nearby, not touching but close, Emmanuel felt the weight of his decision settle too, a shift from solitary survival to something intertwined, healing flickering like a distant light. The days following the storm settled into a tentative standoff. The house a silent arena where Emmanuel and Shadow circled each other like wary combatants assessing old foes. Morning light filtered through curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch between them, amplifying the distance. Emmanuel moved through routines with deliberate slowness, his footsteps soft on the hardwood, but Shadow would retreat to the far corner of the living room, body low and tense, a low growl rumbling from his chest whenever the boy drew too near. The sound was not aggressive, but guarded a vibration that echoed Emmanuel's own internal barriers, walls built from years of betrayal, now cracked but not crumbled. Silence hung heavy, broken only by Brian's awkward attempts at conversation, his voice a distant hum ignored by both. Emmanuel avoided eye contact, busying himself with books or sketches, his gaze flicking to Shadow only in stolen moments, noting the dog's scarred ears flattening at sudden noises, a car horn outside the clatter of dishes like mirrors to his own flinches. Shadow's amber eyes followed him, unblinking and piercing, but the dog made no move to close the gap, preferring the safety of his blanket in the corner, body curled tight, as if shielding vulnerabilities. Guarded looks exchanged across rooms, Emmanuel pausing at the doorway, hand hovering as if to reach out only to withdraw. Shadow lifting his head, nostrils flaring to scent the air, then settling back with a sigh that spoke of mistrust earned in distant wars. One afternoon, sunlight slanting through the window like a hesitant visitor, Emmanuel noticed Shadow licking obsessively at his flank, the scar tissue raw and weeping from the storm's aggravation. The dog's tongue rasped against the wound, a rhythmic sound that tugged at something deep in Emmanuel's chest, a memory of tending his own cuts in the jungle alone, under thorned canopies. He hesitated in the doorway, breath caught, then moved to the bathroom cabinet, retrieving antiseptic and gauze with hands that trembled slightly, echoes of his sister's fevered brow flashing in his mind. Shadow tensed as he approached, body coiling like a spring, but didn't growl, his eyes locking onto Emmanuel's with a silent plea masked as wariness. Kneeling at a respectful distance, Emmanuel dabbed the ointment gently, the cool liquid seeping into the scar, Shadow's flinch, mirroring the boy's own suppressed wince at the contact. No words passed, only the shared hush of pain acknowledged the dog's breathing, steadying under the careful touch, a moment where vulnerabilities aligned like stars in a fractured sky. Evening light faded into dusk, painting the living room in hues of amber and shadow, when Shadow nudged a fallen spoon across the floor toward Emmanuel's feet, a small, deliberate push with his muzzle, the metal clinking softly like a distant bell. Emmanuel froze, mid-sketch, the sound triggering a cascade of memories, his sister Amina in the village hut, sliding a shared mango pit toward him with a grin, her laughter a balm against the encroaching war. The gesture, simple and unasked, cracked open the vault of his past, the jungle's humid grip, the sting of loss when her hand had last reached for him in the chaos. Shadow paused, head tilted, ears perked, as if sensing the shift, his amber eyes holding Emmanuel's, without demand, a quiet acknowledgement that pierced the boy's defenses. No recoil this time. Instead, the dog settled closer, not touching, but near enough for warmth to radiate his breath, a steady rhythm syncing with Emmanuel's quickening pulse. Another day, a sharp bark from Shadow at a passing shadow outside yanked Emmanuel from reverie, the sound echoing a comrade's warning cry before an ambush, the bark, not alarm, but alert, tying the dog's instinct to the boy's buried reflexes. Emmanuel's hand hovered, then dropped the pencil, reaching tentatively to scratch behind Shadow's ear. The dog leaned in, fractionally, a pause that spoke volumes, acceptance blooming like a forgotten flower in barren soil. These small ties wove deeper, a dropped napkin fetched triggering flashes of loyalty in the camps. A soft whine during Emmanuel's nightmare, pulling him back like Amina's voice once had. Without words, the connection solidified flashbacks no longer solitary torments, but shared bridges. Shadow's presence, a gentle tether grounding the storms within. The room felt charged, their bond evolving in these unspoken exchanges, pain transmuted into something almost tender. One crisp afternoon, sunlight streaming through the window like spilled honey, Emmanuel absent-mindedly tossed a crumpled paper ball across the room, watching it arc lazily through the air. Shadow's eyes tracked it, body tensing, before he pounced paws skidding on the hardwood as he batted it back with surprising playfulness, tail swishing in a tentative wag. The sight caught Emmanuel off guard. A raw, unexpected chuckle bubbled up from his chest, rusty and unfamiliar, echoing in the quiet house like a long-forgotten melody. It was laughter genuine and unbidden, warming his core like embers stirred from ash, the sound making Shadow pause, head cocked before chasing the ball again with renewed vigor. The room transformed, shadows retreating as play unfolded. Emmanuel rolling the ball under the couch, Shadow diving after it, emerging triumphant with fur disheveled and eyes bright. Warmth seeped in, not just from the sun, but from within the dog's energy, coaxing Emmanuel to his knees, hands clapping softly to encourage a spark of joy igniting in his eyes that had been dull for so long. Brian peeked in, a smile creasing his face, but stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. Later, Emmanuel offered a treat from his hand, palm open and steady. Shadow approached without hesitation, tongue brushing skin, gently accepting the morsel, with a soft huff that felt like approval. The space hummed with safety walls that once loomed now, cradling their shared ease, the dog's relaxation mirroring the boy's loosening shoulders. Play evolved into quiet companionship, Shadow flopping beside him during reading, a warm weight against his leg, the first true spark of comfort blooming like dawn after endless night. Laughter lingered in Emmanuel's thoughts that evening. A fragile flame against the cold of memory, the house no longer a refuge of isolation, but a haven kindled by this unexpected bond. Their interactions grew fluid, a nudge for attention, a grin in response, warmth spreading like wildfire in dry grass, safety woven in the fabric of small, joyful gestures. Moonlight filtered through the blinds like fractured memories, casting striped shadows across Emmanuel's room, where sleep eluded him once more. He lay rigid on the bedsheets, twisted around his legs like vines from the jungle that still haunted his dreams. The clock ticked mercilessly each second, a reminder of the hours lost to visions of gunfire and fallen comrades, his breath coming in shallow gasps as sweat beaded on his forehead. A particularly vivid nightmare gripped him. Amina's face dissolving into smoke, her pleas morphing into the crack of whips, jerking him awake with a muffled cry, heart pounding like war drums in his chest. He sat up, burying his face in his hands, the darkness pressing in, amplifying the isolation that had become his constant companion. Then a soft creak at the door. Shadow, who had taken to sleeping in the hallway, pushed it open with his nose, his silhouette a dark guardian in the threshold. The dog's eyes gleamed in the low light, reflecting a knowing that transcended words, his limping gait deliberate as he approached the bed without invitation. Emmanuel tensed muscles, coiling instinctively, but Shadow didn't hesitate. He leapt onto the mattress with surprising grace, the bed dipping under his weight, and pressed his body against the boy's side. Warm fur-brushing skin chilled by fear. A low whine escaped the dog, not of distress but of empathy, as he rested his head on Emmanuel's thigh. The gesture heavy with surrender, tail still, ears relaxed, scars exposed in the moonlight, like badges of shared battles. The fragile peace that had settled over the house began to fray at the edges, subtle at first, like the distant rumble of thunder on a clear day. Emmanuel's nightmares intensified, no longer solitary torments, but amplified by an unseen presence, his thrashing waking him to find Shadow already alert at the foot of the bed, ears pricked and body rigid. The dog would pace the room, a low growl vibrating from his chest at shadows cast by passing headlights, his amber eyes scanning the windows as if detecting ghosts from their shared wars. One night a car idled too long on the street outside its engine, a muffled purr that sent Shadow into stillness, tail straight, hackles rising subtly, a primal instinct flaring before Emmanuel even stirred. The boy felt it too, a prickling at his nape. Echoes of jungle ambushes where silence preceded slaughter. his heart quickening in sync with the dog's wary stance. Triggers multiplied. A news report on the TV about distant conflicts made Shadow bark sharply at the screen. Body low and protective, his growl a warning that stirred Emmanuel's buried fears, the commander's voice overlapping with the anchor's. Outside walks turned tense. Shadow would freeze mid-step, nose to the ground, barking at unseen scents carried on the wind, his posture alert like a sentinel sensing intruders. Subtle tension wove through their days, the house's calm now laced with anticipation. Shadow's instincts foreshadowing a threat from the past, his stillness a harbinger more eloquent than words. Emmanuel noticed the changes, his own unease mounting the dog's behavior, mirroring the resurfacing trauma, a quiet storm building on the horizon. The community fair buzzed with innocuous cheer booths, hawking cotton candy laughter, ringing like distant bells. But for Emmanuel, it unraveled like a frayed rope when Shadow's body went rigid beside him. The dog's hackles rose, a low growl building in his throat as his gaze fixed on a man across the crowd, tall, scarred cheek eyes like polished obsidian. The commander, Emmanuel's tormentor, now masquerading as a vendor in this American suburb. Recognition hit like a mortar blast. Emmanuel's vision tunneled the fair's colors, bleeding into jungle greens, flashbacks crashing in waves, the whip cracking across his back, Amina's screams as the man ordered her execution, blood soaking the earth. Shadow lunged forward on the leash, protective aggression erupting in snarls that bared teeth scarred from past chains. His body a shield rooted in trauma instincts flaring, as if scenting the abuser's cruelty anew. Emmanuel's panic surged, a tidal wave of emotion flooding him. He shouted at Brian, "We have to go now," his voice cracking raw, laced with the terror of a child soldier reborn. The crowd blurred, hearts pounding in unison, boy and dog, as Shadow pressed against Emmanuel's leg, growling fiercer, a maternal ferocity in his stance, defending the pack he'd claimed. Emotions exploded. Emmanuel's hands shook, fists clenching as suppressed rage boiled over tears, stinging eyes he refused to let fall, while Shadow's whines interspersed the growls, revealing glimpses of his own abuse handler's boots explosions that had left him broken. Brian, confused, tried to calm them, but Emmanuel withdrew violently, yanking Shadow away through the throng, shouts echoing accusations at phantoms. Back home, the door slammed, Emmanuel collapsing against it, breath-heaving Shadow, pacing protectively, their shared flood of pain, a torrent that stripped away the fragile peace. Withdrawal set in Emmanuel, curling on the floor, silent sobs racking him. Shadow lying close but vigilant, their trauma laid bare in the quiet aftermath. The explosion had cracked them open, flashbacks of violence, intertwining the commander's laugh over gunfire. Shadow's yelps under bombardment, a mutual recognition that bound them tighter in the wreckage. Panic lingered like smoke, the house a sanctuary turned bunker, both flooded with the raw emotion of past horrors resurfacing. Twilight draped the gas station in a veil of amber haze, pumps humming like dormant beasts as Emmanuel filled Brian's car, Shadow leashed at his side nose, twitching at the acrid scent of fuel. A truck pulled up nearby, engine rumbling low, and the door swung open. Out stepped the tormentor, his face unchanged. A cold smile curling as recognition dawned, instantaneous eyes locking on Emmanuel like a predator spotting prey. "Boy," the man rasped voice, a gravelly echo of jungle commands. "You made it far." Shadow's reaction was primal hackles, exploding body launching forward with a ferocious snarl, teeth snapping inches from the man's leg, before Emmanuel hauled him back, the leash straining like a lifeline. The abuser returned in flesh, no longer a ghost, but tangible threat. His presence igniting a flashpoint, Emmanuel's control shattering as rage surged, fists balling, a shout ripping from his throat. You took everything!" Flashbacks assaulted him, the village burning, Amina's body crumpling under the man's orders, his own hands forced to pull triggers while the commander laughed. The gas station's neon lights buzzed overhead like accusatory stars as police sirens wailed in the distance, their red and blue flashes painting Emmanuel's face in stark relief. He slumped against the car, adrenaline draining like blood from a vein, regret crashing over him in waves. Why had he swung first? Why expose the fragile life he'd built? Shadow whimpered softly, pressing his flank against Emmanuel's leg, the dog's warmth a silent anchor amid the chaos, but the boy pulled away slightly, guilt twisting his gut for dragging the animal into his storm. Brian arrived, face etched with worry, questions tumbling out. But Emmanuel met them with silence, lips pressed, thin eyes distant. As memories replayed the commander's sneer, shadows bite the spill of fuel like spilled secrets. Suburban nights, once a blanket of uneasy calm, now thrummed with unspoken menace, the air thick as jungle humidity before a raid. Emmanuel felt eyes on him during evening walks, a prickle at his neck turning to paranoia, shadows lengthening unnaturally behind parked cars, a figure lingering at the corner store, vanishing when he turned. Shadow's instincts sharpened first, the dog's ears perking at faint footsteps outside the window, a low growl escaping as he paced the perimeter of the yard, nose to the ground, scenting invisible trails. Subtle signs accumulated like gathering storm clouds. A crumpled note slipped under the door, scrawled with, "You can't hide forever." The handwriting a ghost from Emmanuel's nightmares, making his hands tremble as he crushed it. Brian dismissed it as a prank, but Shadow knew better, his body tensing at the mailbox, barking at envelopes that carried no scent but threat. During a late-night errand, the stalking intensified, tires crunching slowly behind them on empty streets, headlights dimmed like predator eyes. Shadow's hackles rising, pulling Emmanuel into alleys where echoes of pursuit quickened their steps. Back in the house, days unfolded in a steady rhythm of recovery, the living room bathed in soft afternoon light, filtering through curtains that swayed gently with the breeze, carrying scents of fresh grass and distant rain. Emmanuel moved with deliberate care, his bandaged arm a constant reminder as he lowered a bowl of water to the floor. Shadow's eyes meeting his amber depths, steady, holding a gaze that spoke of depths traversed together, no longer wary, but woven with quiet understanding. The dog's tail thumped once, a small gesture rippling through the air like a heartbeat, as he lapped slowly, Emmanuel kneeling nearby, his breath sinking with the rhythmic splash, sensory details anchoring them, the cool tile under knees, the faint metallic tang of medicine on Shadow's fur. One crisp morning, sunlight piercing the haze like a hesitant promise, Emmanuel clipped the leash to Shadow's collar, the click a soft affirmation in the quiet house. They stepped out together, steps falling into natural sync, Emmanuel's measured stride matching the dog's limping gait pause, and feet printing tandem paths on the dew-kissed sidewalk. The air carried scents of blooming jasmine, a gentle breeze ruffling Shadow's fur, his tail swaying with unhurried joy. "Shadow," Emmanuel called softly, the name a bridge built from whispers in the dark. The dog turned, eyes bright, responding with a wag that quickened a bond etched in every motion. At the park's edge, under a canopy of leaves whispering secrets, Emmanuel knelt on the grass level with those amber depths that had seen his soul's fractures. His hand cupped the dog's muzzle forehead, pressing gently against Shadow's breaths, mingling in warm exhales, intimate as a vow, the touch a release of caged fears, scars brushing like shared maps of survival. Emotion welled a quiet torrent, tears pricking Emmanuel's eyes, not of sorrow, but rebirth, the weight of wars lifting in this singular act. Shadow leaned in, a low rumble of contentment vibrating through them, trust, absolute fear's chains dissolving like mist in the rising sun. Clouds parted, golden light bathing their forms, illuminating faded wounds as symbols of endurance, not defeat. They rose as one, walking onward side by side, the past a faint shadow trailing behind their future, a path forged in unbreakable unity.